I was thinking how sad it is that this is happening in COVID times, so it's not in person, because then we could have been brainstorming what sort of parking themed refreshments we would have been able to serve.
Made a cake looking like a parking lot.
Oh, good. I'll get some later. Okay, thank you.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Dan.
Hi. Hello.
Just give a few more minutes as I can see that people are still coming in. And there are a couple park committee members we're still waiting for as well. We are still waiting for the chair of park to arrive, so we'll just give a couple more minutes so we don't start without him too early. Thank you everyone for waiting.
Good evening. Sorry, I tried several times to get into the Zoom link, but it wouldn't let me in until just now. Sorry, I'm a little bit late.
It's okay, Bernie. We were just waiting for you, and we've had a lot of people joining, so we were going to give a couple extra minutes anyway to allow people to join. When you're ready, you have a quorum, you can call to order, and then I can give some opening remarks and go over some of the Zoom protocols, and we can just jump right in when you're ready.
We'll call to order right now at 7:05. Then I'll hand it right over to you, Julie. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bernie. So hello, everybody. I'm Julie Mercier, Community Development Director from the town of Reading. Tonight's public forum is the Parking Advisory and Recommendations Committee public forum, where they're going to present their recommendations for modifications to the downtown parking system. Tonight's meeting is being held virtually only, so it's Zoom only. And it is also being recorded by RCTV and likely also broadcast by them. We do ask typically in these types of meetings that you please remain muted at all times unless you're the speaker. And then if you do have a question, you can raise your hand under the under reactions at the bottom of your Zoom screen. There's a raise hand feature. And then if you have a question, our plan for this evening is actually to go through the recommendations sort of section by section, and then at the end of each section we'll have a Q&A opportunity. And so if you could just wait until then, we'll acknowledge, someone on Park will acknowledge you, and please state your name and address for the record and unmute yourself. And I think that's all, and I'll turn this over to Chris Haley to kick it off. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you everyone for attending tonight. I just want to take care of some house cleaning stuff right here at the beginning. Most people think that I'm on this committee because I ran on parking and whatnot, and it's partially true. But we all wouldn't be here tonight if it wasn't for my predecessor at the select board, Vanessa Alvarado, and the rest of her board taking the initiative to form this committee. So I definitely want to thank them for their forethought for putting this all together. In addition, the 9 members that are on this committee, it should be 11, because Julie Mercier and Andrew McNichol have been insurmountable with the amount of help that they have done on here. So their names aren't mentioned, but like I said, I consider them the other 2 members that aren't listed here. They've been up with us till 11, 12 o'clock at night sometimes. I mean, they put the work in, so definitely I appreciate it. RCTV as well, because they've been obviously broadcasting and staying up just as well. Deputy Chief Amendola on the PTTF, and our Assistant Town Manager, Jean Delios as well for assisting. And of course, all the other residents and small business owners that participated in the surveys, spoke up, came to some meetings, and voiced their opinions. Without all your help, we wouldn't be here today. So moving on with this though, for our park members, we have our chair, Bernie Horn. Sorry, Karen. Our vice chair, Liz Whitelam. She owns Whitelam Books. Myself, John Weston. I'd like to call him Mr. CPDC because when I first started watching all these meetings, all I remember is his Zoom background all the time. I'm going to loop Karen, Rose Gillis, and Sarah Bucalacchio together because the amount of work that they put in above and beyond what was required of them by passing out flyers and everything to the residents down here in downtown, they weren't expected to do that. They took it on their own. So thank you. Same thing with the people at Bernie's office. I should have mentioned that as well. They also assisted in a lot of number crunching for the surveys and whatnot. Tom O'Connor, he owns Reading Trophy, and him and I can be variously seen over at Fat Larry's around 1 o'clock-ish on some random days together. Jay Jackson, who isn't here tonight, but he definitely made sure that the walkability and biking and public transit was definitely on the forefront with this committee. And Dan Dewar, who owns Quick Stop over on Main Street. My daughter's love for Charleston shoes, my younger daughter, first started at his store, and they're, out of stock now. So he's got to get on that, but that's for another time. So you can go to the next slide, Julie. Or Andrew, sorry. All right, so the downtown parking, the existing deficiencies, there were 12 plus regulations in the area. It was very confusing and frustrating for all the users and the enforcement officers. There weren't enough spaces for each specific user or permit type. There wasn't enough permits available specifically for employees. The time limitations resulted in constant moving of vehicles, and the long-term parking in highly desired utilized areas was a problem. Next slide, please. So the park was charged with to review Reading's downtown parking system and regulations, to guide us in the preparation of comprehensive systems and modifications, to clarify and simplify Reading's downtown parking system from a user perspective and enforcement standpoint, to maximize efficiency and access, to increase public education of parking areas. Park has also discussed the following topics at times, but understands they fall under the jurisdiction of other departments and or boards. So overnight falls with the PTTF or PTTF in the select board, the parking requirements with the zoning bylaws, CPDC, and privately owned parking areas, shared parking opportunities as well. Downtown parking and park. So prior to park, we've done, prior to park, they did 10 Zoom session schedules and conducted, multiple downtown business walks and group meetings, 5 select board meetings. There was a water bill notification residence code alert to over 3,400 people. There was a 2020 survey. Park reviewed the initial finding and proposals from the 2019 to 2020 initiative. We distributed a new parking survey, townwide mailing to all households, including renters, with 700 plus respondents. We've held 10 plus open public meetings, email blast to downtown business and property owners, landlords, and property managers, residents, town meeting members, board and commissions, and survey respondents. I definitely have received numerous emails from the town. And an update to the select board on December 7th, 2021 as well. Next slide. And I believe this is where Bernie takes over, unless anyone has any questions, but I guess we'd get into that afterwards.
Thanks very much, Chris. So we conducted a survey. There have been many surveys, excuse me, on downtown parking in various as part of other surveys, and but this particular survey was dedicated strictly to the parking situation downtown. And in addition to that, we had over 700 responses, and many people took this survey. I would say that even though we've had strong responses to, let's say, the Reimagine Reading survey, which had a part of that survey dealt with parking, this was strictly dedicated to parking, and we think that we've got, one of the largest survey responses. There were about 23 questions. We're not going to cover all 23. We're just going to try to cover the highlights. But I know many people have taken the time to fill out that survey. And I must say that we were very aware of the many diverse comments. I mean, pro and con, a number of different topics. So if you have filled out the survey and you are on the call tonight, you'll feel free to express your opinions, although let's go through this right now. So one of the things that came out from this survey is that how do people get to downtown Reading? Notwithstanding the fact that we do have some public transportation, that is a bus route. Most people in this particular survey, and over 97% on this question, said that they were that they drove downtown. Now, these won't all add up to 100% because some people both walked downtown and took their car. So this is not meant to add up to 100%. But you can see that walking was also an important thing, and this will come back in another minute. So why don't we go on to the next slide? And here, the question was asked, based on your availability of parking, did you shop or run errands outside of downtown Reading? And this was sort of split. And again, the intent of this question was, if you had parking constraints on your visits, did that motivate you to go somewhere else? And you can see here that that was somewhat split. And then if we go to the next slide, the on their visits downtown, did people park for, all these, how long did it take you to park? Or how long did you park for? And you can see here, and this is very consistent with the prior surveys, a lot of people park just for less than 15 minutes, sometimes less than a half hour, an hour, 1 to 2 hours. And there were certainly a lot of people who said 2 to 4 hours, but that's not a huge percentage. And those that are more than that were, somewhat minimal. This does not, and we don't think that we had a substantial response from people who were commuting, but I know that there are some 800 plus permits sold just for parking for residents, which typically are used for commuting, but not always. So let's go to the next slide. Here, I think this left-hand slide is very interesting in the sense that we ask people, when you do go downtown, how many stops do you make? Well, some percentage, just about a third, 1 stop, but there were a substantial number of people who do 2 or 3, and sometimes more than 3 stops. And then when people do make their multiple stops, how do they get from one place to the other? And you can see walking is quite a viable means for most people. Some people have to drive from one spot to the other. And I think there's a little bit more interpretation on question number 8. So if you think about when the prior question, when people said, if I can't get parking, I'll go somewhere else. And as far as downtown businesses and accessibility are concerned, if a person who typically would make 2 to 3 stops, they decide to go somewhere else, that means the businesses downtown could in fact be losing multiple visits when somebody doesn't go downtown but goes somewhere else. So next slide, please. And then this was a subject of some debate with us because we think that perhaps people don't understand how long it really takes them to go someplace, or how long it takes them to walk, or how far they can walk. So we added a little bit of detail in this particular question to indicate that most people can walk a quarter of a mile in 4 to 5 minutes and a mile in 16 to 20 minutes, depending on your pace. But so the question was asked, how long do you have to walk if you can't find parking right where you want it? And so most people estimated, less than 3 or 3 to 4, and higher, 20% or so said 4 to 6 minutes or longer. And we just here we talk about what's a 5-minute walking radius in town, just to kind of give people. This was something that we put in here for the presentation. It was not part of the survey. So let's go to the next slide. So yeah, I think that's the end of our slide presentation. I will say that we had, and I spent considerable amount of time trying to categorize and summarize and print many of the comments that people took the time to put in. And that's, there were a variety of different comments here. Some people were concerned about parking. Some people thought that there was a reasonable amount of parking. You know, our view on the Park Commission was that we had a fair number of spaces, but the question was whether the high use lots, and I think that what we're not presenting here that was particularly noted in the survey is that the CVS lot, which we call the CVS lot, or the lot behind CVS, and the Brandy Court lot down toward the train station, but behind the big, the building there in Haven, those seem to be the most concerning for people. That's where it is perceived that there's the most congestion. And so what we tended to focus on are the employee parking in those two lots that some people would deem to have kind of clogged up the spaces because people were moving their cars from one place to the other. And so that's one of the main focuses of our attention here. And there were a number of people who expressed strongly against paid parking. Some people said they'd be willing to pay for parking, but the survey will be up on our website and you can see a lot of those comments. But I just want to acknowledge that. Thank you for all those people who actually spent the time to write out those answers to the various questions and take the survey. It was probably one of the most extensive surveys on parking that we've seen in Reading. So we can go to the next slide, and I think I'm gonna turn it over to, is it Liz or Karen?
It's me.
Thanks, Liz.
Thanks, Bernie. So for friends watching at home, as foreshadowed, we're kind of breaking this up into chunks. So I'm going to talk right now about employee parking. We will be talking about resident parking, but as Bernie mentioned, through all of the inputs that we've received through the survey, through various comments and feedback, and from the previous work done in early years that we also have reviewed extensively, it was definitely clear that the needs of employees and where they are parking is directly impacting the overall parkability of downtown. And so one of the things that we really felt it was important to solve was to make sure that there was sufficient and accessible employee parking so that we then have enough inventory for everybody to use who is just visiting, shopping, dining, etc. So in terms of what we are talking about here, I'm going to go through I'm going to talk a little bit about street parking for employees. And as Bernie mentioned, we are going to be talking about lots, but that's a little bit later. So what were we trying to do for on-street regulation proposals for employee parking? We are recommending that we increase the number of dedicated employee parking spaces and therefore increase the number of employee parking permits available. So we do have a chart that is on the next slide that I'm not going to go through line by line, but we're happy to talk about that shows places where we can allow an increased number, in fact, 103 employee parking spaces through Lowell Street, Woburn Street, High Street, Chute Street, Haven Street, Chapin Avenue, and Hardin Street, where we would put that, an additional over 100 parking spaces that would be 2 hours or employee all day with an employee permit. So again, that whole parking inventory, it allows more places for employees to park if employees need them, but when employees are not there, they're available to anyone, just like any other parking space, as current employee spaces already are. We are recommending that we modify the pricing of the employee permits because right now they're pretty expensive for small businesses to buy in quantity. So we want to make them a little more affordable to really make sure that businesses have the incentive to buy more permits for employees and get their employees into these spots and out of the other spots that we're hoping other folks will use. And a big part of that proposal includes that many of these spots are in what we call the outer core, so around the edges of the downtown, not right in the downtown where visitors would want to park. And so part of what we are also suggesting is that we are reviewing some of the safety, lighting, and walkability in these outer core areas, just to make sure that when we're asking employees to now park a little bit further away from where they work, that it's not going to be in any way hazardous or difficult to walk from those spots to where they're working. Next slide, Andrew. Thank you. So this is the aforementioned chart. Again, I'm not going to read it aloud to you line by line, but this is available on the park page of the town website. And as we get into Q&A, happy to go over any individual specific streets. Andrew, next slide. So in addition to finessing the employee parking on streets, then we also wanted to look at streamlining the regulations for customer and just generally public parking on our streets. So within the inner core, so sort of within Woburn Street, Main Street, Washington Street, the tight inside part of downtown that we all think of, we wanted to make sure that we could have sufficient public 2-hour parking spaces throughout the inner core, which would allow for more parking turnover and availability for customers. So we're recommending that we increase the number of spaces dedicated to 2-hour, about 27 spaces along Ash Street and Gould Street. And again, some of the spaces that we're proposing along Vine and High Street would be public parking, and then also that all-day parking with employee permit, but 2 hours for anyone else. And also, it should be noted that all of our on-street parking is unregulated after 5 p.m. So when you're thinking about dining in the evenings, or if you're going to CVS to pick up a prescription later, those kinds of errands or activities after 5 p.m., all spaces are just are unregulated. So there is no time limit. Next slide. And so this is another little chart that just kind of specifies some of those specific regulations. And when you go onto the website and look at these charts, and I know you all will because it's fascinating and you're going to want to do this in your spare time, you'll see what the existing regulations are and what the proposed regulations are. So it's nice to have that comparison. Next slide, please. And there is also this zesty map, which again is fascinating reading, but can help you as you toggle back and forth between the chart and trying to visualize, like, wait, where's Chapin? Where is everything? So it is indicated in a map as well. I think that's me. Oh yes, and then the regulations. So within the inner core area, there are some areas that are resident-only parking. Generally throughout the downtown. So this includes the commuter rail station and the other side of the commuter rail station heading up towards West Street. Right now, all of the resident-only parking is 6 to 10:30 a.m. One of the proposals we are setting forth is to shorten that window to 9:30 a.m. For a couple of reasons. One, we've definitely seen behavior changes at the commuter rail station, largely due to COVID, but also just due to changes in business behaviors where everybody isn't not necessarily commuting at the same time. So there isn't that huge rush up until, the early morning. So there is still more traffic then to the train. So we want to make sure that the commuters specifically have enough leeway to park. But we want to give flexibility to more people who are just visiting downtown to have access to more, frankly, unregulated parking from 9:30 onwards. So if you were going to the area of the commuter rail or some of the street parking that is resident only, we are proposing moving that to 9:30 instead of 10:30 a.m. As part of that discussion, as I just mentioned, some changes in behavior with commuting. We're talking about reallocating some of the spaces directly abutting the commuter rail station because future commuting needs look like they might be a little more variable. And again, if all of these spaces that right now are resident only, they're unregulated after 9:30. And so those are all available, and even right now after 10:30, available for anybody to use for whatever period of time. So they're not just 2 hour after that, they're just unregulated. So longer term parking is available there. So this is the map that shows where the resident parking is, where the commuter parking is. So this is just another zesty reference document that you can all enjoy. Any questions?
If you have questions, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom. It's under reactions. If you can't get that to work, raise your hand like this. I'll scroll through and try to make sure I don't miss anybody.
Yes.
Okay, I see George McHugh has his hand raised. Liz or George, go ahead.
Yes, thank you for recognizing that. I tried to hit the little hand there, but I wasn't getting a reaction. Without commenting on the whole report, other than say, obviously, thank you for taking a deep dive and trying to do the best for the residents of Brookline, the commuters that come to Brookline, the employees that work at Brookline, and the businesses that employ those employees. But I have a concern when I read this, actually a great disappointment. And after I've just heard all this stuff, and I saw things before, and when this all started, I had a couple of personal conversations with Julie and attended some early meetings, took the survey. I happen to be an owner of a 16-unit building that doesn't have parking on Sanborn Street. And your proposal has that as 2-hour parking only, where on the other side of Lowell Street, of Sanborn Street, but on the other side of Lowell Street, it's unregulated. And I'm just wondering, and they have parking. There's a condominium up there. They have a parking lot. I don't have a parking lot. So my people have overnight parking. They pay for it, my residents. And then for them to be subject to 2-hour constrictions when they pull over in the street and hear that, commuters, we need to take care of the commuters. We need to take care of the employees and give them permits, and so they can park all day. It seems like we are not being heard. And certainly I wasn't being heard as a taxpayer in the town of Reading. So I'd like you to take that into consideration. I'm not asking that you possibly solve that tonight. But I think it's a great oversight by this committee. And you had a very challenging job. I understand that, to try and craft something.
How about
that-
have no regulations and just let people park? Like, who's really not being able to park?
Right.
So George, I'm sorry, Linda, can you please mute? We're on George right now. George, thank you so much for your feedback. It is greatly appreciated. And thank you for attending tonight. I'm sorry, can you clarify, did you say your residents have somewhere that they can park? Where are they parking overnight?
Predominantly, they park overnight at the Knights of Columbus parking lot.
Oh, I see.
There are
Okay.
others that park in other lots. And then there's several other residents that do not have a car.
Gotcha.
The mix of the building is, it's a 16-unit building with 8 studios and 8 one-bedrooms. So there's not a lot of residents to the occupancy of those 16 units, if you can imagine. Most of them are occupied by a single individual. A lot of them seniors. And, it's disturbing to hear them say, that they get a ticket because they pulled up in front of their home, and then down on Linden Street, it's like, hey, we could park here all day long, all day. Or now we're talking about, well, we got to take care of these employees at CVS, and they can park out on Woburn Street all day long. And I'm going, and then we're subject to just that little area. It doesn't make any sense to us.
George, this is
All right, that
Bernie
is-
Horn. Sorry,
That's
did you wanna
that's
finish
helpful
that?
feedback, George. Thank you.
Thank you. I
George,
hope you take that in consideration.
This is Bernie Horn, and just, I think this is a subject that we debated quite extensively in many of our meetings, and that is the establishment of residences downtown. And the residents, where are they going to park? And I think one of the issues that we've been wondering about is why wasn't there enough parking built on the site when it was built in order to accommodate the needs of the overnight parking for the residents.
And I would respond that if any of us in this group or in this meeting tonight was here in 1935 when it was permitted, that possibly we could answer that question. But the fact is, it wasn't.
All right, so your building was built a lot earlier and in the
Yes,
past,
sir.
people that were, okay.
This is not a recently permitted renovation, rehabilitation like the Postmark that has its own parking is required by planning and the town's guidance. And I'm just saying it what it is. And I think it's an egregious oversight to look at this one area, because they're on the residents on the street. There's an office building on the opposite side. Our neighbors are funeral home, and they park out there traditionally evenings. Then there's a couple of parking areas. There's the Knights of Columbus that has their own parking area. There's a 3-family between my building and the Knights of Columbus. It has 5 spaces to accommodate those units, and occasionally rents to one of my residents. It's the
Okay,
only
so,
resident, it's the only resident, it's the only resident that doesn't have its own parking, and yet it's subject to 2-hour parking. I said, I was perplexed.
So
and
George,
disappointed to see that.
George, just to clarify, this is not actually a change in regulation that we're proposing. This already exists. And you're saying that you were hoping.
Understood, and I made
Yeah,
that
so
clear.
you were hoping that as the park was reevaluating all of downtown, we might take a second look at Sanborn.
That was
and think about
my
changing that.
request, and as I said, and to hear, well, I think we came up with a great plan, and we're gonna do a better job taking care of the employees that work there, and not make any adjustment for my residents.
Right. So let me clarify 2 things, George. One, it wasn't so much that we're like, oh, let's try to take care of the employees. The goal was actually, and again, as a business owner who has employees, the goal is to actually get the employees out of the inner core. So it's not like, oh, let's make things fabulous only for employees. It was, let's get employees kind of out of the way of residents and people downtown. So
Understood.
just a perspective change there. But I understand what you're saying about Sanborn. So we had not proposed any change to the regulations on that street. And we are hearing you loud and clear that you'd like us to look at that again. And so we are having a follow-up to discuss it further next week. And so consider yourself very much heard, and we will look at it again.
Thank you, I appreciate the time.
You're welcome. Thank you. I think Diane was next. Is that right, Julie?
Yes, thank you. Diane Chapin.
Hi. The reason why I'm sitting in tonight and have been checking out the materials is my concern is for handicap parking, not only for regular handicap parking, but van accessible parking. And I haven't seen or heard anything about handicap parking. And those of us who are either handicapped or seniors can't have the benefit of going into town because there aren't enough parking spaces and the walk is too great for disabilities or whatever, or wheelchairs. So I would just like to make sure that you're sensitive to that.
Thank you, Diane. We appreciate that feedback. We did, you're right that we did not articulate handicap spaces in tonight's presentation, and we probably could have, we certainly have discussed it. I don't want you to think that we haven't discussed that or looked into it at all. And Julie and Andrew could probably clarify a little better than I can in terms of the number of handicap spaces downtown versus the total. So I think it's fair to say that what we had researched is that we are consistent with, I believe, what is suggested or required in terms of public spaces, percentage and location of handicap spaces. But I agree that, you know, we've had some discussion about, is there room for some more? Can we make this a little better? I think that's great feedback that we need to look at that a little more, because we have, and we hadn't really come to any final recommendations there. So thank you for reminding us to keep that top of mind.
And just for extra sensitivity, to be careful for van accessible, because the ramps are side ramps.
Yeah.
And you need to be able to exit going down the ramp and making a turn. So a handicap van accessibility space is not the same as just a handicap space where somebody can get in the car and get out without a ramp.
Yeah, thank you, Diane. That actually had definitely come up in the meeting when we were talking about that some of the spaces
Okay.
that we have right now, you could only exit one side with a wheelchair or neither side, or yeah, so
Yeah.
I hear that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We have sort of asked the police department and the town engineers if they could consider certain spaces to be kind of repurposed for handicap. So that's not something that it's not because we're not proposing it here that it's not under consideration, but we definitely heard, especially in our survey, that was one of the most surprising things that we heard was the lack of handicap parking that many people expressed. So we're definitely hearing you on that.
Thank you.
So Angelo has his hand raised. Angelo?
Yes, hi, Angelo. Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, perfect. So I actually just wanted to echo what George said. I presented last month. I actually live on Sanborn Street too as well, but I'm on the opposite end where I'm in the new postmark building. And I presented data that there wasn't enough parking, that the contractor made for everyone, and a lot of us are parking and renting in lots. And I was just hoping at some point that we'd be able to, or as a committee, discuss regulations on Sanborn overnight parking, just because it's not just the older buildings, it is the newer buildings, and the more and more downtown builds, there's going to be a struggle for parking on Sanborn Street and for residents around downtown. So I was hoping that at some point that could be discussed. And I just did want to say, a few people have asked me and others in my building, like, why would we buy a condo if we only knew we had 1.0 acres? I thought we could park on the street with no restrictions, but that aside, we could ask the same question to business owners. Why would you have a business running for no limitations of parking in town? And,
Angelo, you're breaking up.
It's the same thing on our end. Why are you asking us? Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, no, and Angelo, I heard what you said, and I absolutely agree with you. Both residents and business owners
Yeah.
shouldn't be buying property if they without evaluating, and that no, that's again part of why we're trying to get employees out of the areas where people are expecting to park downtown, because those were not ever intended to be used up that way. So in terms of overnight parking, if you didn't have, I'm sure everybody on this call attends every town meeting on Zoom every night because it's so easy now. And the select board last night did have a discussion about some overnight parking. And I may let Chris speak to that a little later, but there is some proposal for some overnight parking in the Lincoln Street lot. I think it was made clear from both the DPW and the Reading Police Department that they're not comfortable with overnight street parking. That is not anything that is currently on the table, but we are trying to find some solutions in some of the lots and other areas. So we can probably get back to that.
Can answer real quick, Liz, if you like.
Yeah, sure.
The select board did vote last night to go ahead and move it to a public meeting that's going to be held on, I believe, the 14th or the 15th. So it's going to be discussed then, and as long as there's no objection, it's going to go ahead and move forward. So it has the select board's blessing as well as the PTTF. So it looks as if 35 spots will be available over there, but just remember you have to leave by 6 a.m. If you don't, you're going to end up getting towed regardless. So hopefully it's a pilot program, so hopefully it works out. We'll have to see what happens, but we scrambled to put something together, as well as the PTTF and the DPW. So like I said, maybe Julie has the exact date, but I think it's the 14th or 15th. It was just getting advertised today, I think. So thanks.
Yeah, I think that's the 15th. And so for those of you who didn't see the meeting last night, the proposed area for the overnight parking is down on Lincoln Street. If you see the little magic hand moving on the slide there, if you were standing with your back to the Met and you're facing Swiss Bakers, it's that lot, the off-street parking in that lot there on the right. So that is a place where people can park overnight. I think we had some more hands raised. Julie, I'm not sure if you're able to, I can't tell if Rachel is next or if that's just on my screen.
I have David Zeke's hand up.
There you go.
But hold on a second, I might be missing. Oh, Rachel probably was first and then, sorry, David, Rachel, Krista, Naomi, Mary Beth, and then David. Rachel, go ahead.
You're still on mute, Rachel. Rachel, you need to unmute yourself. You're still muted.
Julie, do we have to unmute Rachel or is that up to her?
No, she needs to do it, actually.
Does she know it's down in the bottom left?
Hopefully it should be on your bottom left, Rachel. The microphone button should pop up if you just unmute these.
You're just being thwarted by technology, aren't you? I mean, your thing is not letting you. I know. I can sense that you are
Sometimes-
pushing the appropriate button.
Sometimes if you,
No, she's on her phone, so it's probably an iPhone or something.
So Rachel, what we're going to do is we're going to move on for the moment, and you work on it and break in if you are empowered. So that means Krista, I think you're next.
Hi, thank you. I'm Krista Skinner. I own 6062 Sanborn Street. So we're Upper Sanborn, and I appreciate the committee's hard work. I'd like to say that first off. I have two concerns. The first concern I have is that I'm fine with Upper Sanborn being unregulated, but I think there's been a lot of changes in the last few years on Upper Sanborn. We have a dance school that is now a conservatory, which means that they are running all day, 5 days a week into the early evening, as well as weekends, and they have no parking. And I support them 100%, and I know they're struggling with this, but I think one thing that might be helpful on Sanborn Street is there's actually no clearly marked spots. And so we see crosswalks that are blocked as people kind of just jam themselves onto the street. They're pulling into the curb cuts on various streets. They're kind of piling up on the sidewalk. I went out one warmer day a few weeks ago at about 6 o'clock on a Monday night, and there were 43 cars parked on both sides of Sanborn Street, as well as a multitude of cars stopping in the middle of the street and picking up people and dropping them off. And in the last 2 years, we've also had the condos on Sanborn Street open, which is added to traffic as well. And they do have spaces in the condos, but they do have visitors that don't have spaces. So that's more visitors to the street. And so I think for me, it's more safety. You have residents who can't get in and out of their driveways efficiently. We have had cars, we have an idle law in Massachusetts and Reading, I guess. And there are cars sitting parked for over an hour waiting for their students to come out of the dance school, which impacts our environment, especially in this neighborhood. And so I think for me, I think there needs to be some more regulation in terms of where can you park on these unregulated streets, as opposed to, just jam yourself into a spot for however long you can. It's okay if your tail end is going out onto Lowell Street, or you're kind of drifting onto Woburn Street, or you're super close to a fire hydrant. So I think that we didn't realize the impact over the last couple of years, because obviously the dance studio was closed on and off due to COVID. The condos were closed due to the fire. But I would say in the last 6 months, the volume of traffic and the volume of parking has quadrupled. And I think it's a safety concern on top of everything else. And then we have residents from the new development down the street who in the summertime, because they don't have parking, are coming up to Upper Sanborn to park. So I think that that's really my main concern is if we're going to have unregulated parking, I think there have to be clearly defined parking spots as opposed to people who decide, excuse me, like this is my spot and I'm just going to jam my car in here is for as long as I can, because it's only going to be 5 minutes or whatever the situation is. And I know the church on the street has had more events recently as we've opened up a little bit more in COVID. I know Creative Arts is in there. So I think there's a lot happening on Sanborn Street that I think it needs a second look.
Okay, thank you, Krista. Yeah, fair enough. So a couple things. I know that I'm certainly not going to presume to speak about lining spaces on a street. It's something we've talked about with our friends who know more about it. So Jean and Julie and Andrew can certainly say more about the nuances of actually painting lines on a street and what that can do. So from a safety perspective, it certainly sounds like, and I'm sorry, Deputy Chief Amendola wasn't able to be with us tonight. She has logged many hours with this committee. And I know she has some thoughts on this, but it certainly sounds like a little more enforcement of what's happening on that street might be in order if people are indeed blocking driveways and getting too close to hydrants. I know there had been some discussion also at one point of maybe trying to have parking on only one side of the street, but we also know that from a safety perspective, having kind of a little bit of the higgledy-piggledy parking on either side actually is a traffic calming device. So it actually helps keep cars moving more slowly up the street. But I think we're hearing you loud and clear that we need to, in our follow-up meeting, talk to our town hall expert friends about what is required. You know, what are the ramifications of lining a street, lining spaces, what engineering would have to say about that, and we need to get input from the police department about some of the things that you're talking about and how we could be.
It could, and I'll just piggyback onto something that somebody else said earlier. I think it's, again, I support the businesses and the things that are going on in town, but I think it's difficult to open a conservatory on a residential street when you don't have a parking lot. And have full-time dance students. And I get it. Like, I don't know what the answer is, but I think that it takes some brainstorming with the town to figure out. I know if you live near a school anywhere else in Reading, there's very strict parking about when you can park and when cars can be moving. And I think that is something that needs to be looked at on Sanborn Street as well.
So we talked immensely about this very subject, and I think the problem that we see going forward is that with all the new development downtown, these sorts of issues are going to become more and more acute. But what we did notice is that is not, unfortunately, under our purview, right? We were just trying to find how to manage the existing spaces that are already under the control of the town and to make those being used more efficiently. But the CPDC and, you know, to some degree, the select board and the zoning, I would strongly urge everybody on this call that if they see these as issues, that's where you need to focus those sorts of comments, because it appears to us that, you know, some of the issues with the new developments, there is parking not being accommodated by the developers, by the developments, and therefore those residents are having to park elsewhere. This problem is not going to go away. But I guess the only other thing about the conservatory is that when a business gets so busy, at some point they may need to consider, you know, relocating to a place that's more accommodative to their business needs. But that's again not our purview.
Thank you, Krista. Just quickly, you know what, I'm sorry, we meant to be asking this. If people who are commenting, if you wouldn't mind letting us know how you heard about tonight's meeting, it's just going to help, you know, as other committees and organizations are trying to reach the public. You know, there's been a lot of effort to have emails and social media and postcards and flyers. So we're just wondering how we got to you all this evening. So if when you're commenting, you could also just, you know, tell us how you heard about tonight's meeting.
Liz, it looks like, oh, Rachel, she's muted again, but she was unmuted for a period of time there. I don't know if she's able to unmute again. Rachel?
Hi,
Yay.
yay. Hi, everyone. Sorry about that earlier. Apparently I am crazy and set my settings to like never let Zoom hear me ever. So first off, I love that we're talking about moving the employees out of the CVS and Brandy Court lots as much as they are. I think that's great because I think it's gonna open up a lot more spaces. My customer only is in my shop 15 minutes up to like a bridal consultation for an hour and a half. So this is gonna really help my business. I do worry about where we're relocating the employee spots and residents being upset and other concerns that I've heard tonight. I do think it's an issue where we're building so much and there's so many more people living in town and there's nowhere for them to park and not enough parking in their buildings. So they're all parking elsewhere. It's like a domino effect. So I think you guys are doing the best you can with what we're working with in this situation. But I'm a little bit worried about my employees. We luckily have an alley that we can fit maybe 3 cars plus my delivery van in. I'm a little bit worried about where, like how many spots along, say, Woburn Street, where it's all residential, and Chute Street, are there going to be spots on Chute Street before the stop sign, or is it the other side by Bancroft?
So Rachel, are you on a computer right now or your phone? Are you able to see the map that's on the screen?
I can see the map. I can zoom in too.
So if you,
and I've looked at it before, but I feel like it keeps changing.
yeah, so based on, so that whole area along High Street
Mhm.
and Vine Street, so like that's a ton now of employee
And
parking. That's
that's
very close.
along where the train is, right?
Right. So, and that's
Okay.
very close to you. And then,
Okay.
yeah, all the way up that all of Woburn. Do you see see all the
Yeah.
blue?
Yeah.
And
I'm
then
just
the upper part of Chute.
And my other concern is like the front of my building wasn't being addressed at all. And then
No.
now I think it has been. Right in front, like where Columbo's Pizza is, that building right there on Brandy Court. I had reached out and mentioned we would really love a spot right in front of our building that would be like a 15-minute loading zone only, just delivery purposes only. I mean, we're in and out of that spot loading up funeral work and stuff all day long. I'm just worried that, can someone park there all day?
No, those are in front of you is just the regular 2-hour right now. But yeah, I mean, I know there's certainly been success adding some 15 and 30-minute spots in a couple other targeted locations. So
And I know you're a business owner too, Liz. I mean, and I threw this out there a couple of years ago when the parking was just being talked about. Wouldn't it be great? I know it's far-fetched. If every small business right in front of their storefront had a 15-minute kind of parking just for the person grabbing something and going. A lot of the businesses downtown are that.
yeah, I mean, the good news, Rachel, is that what we really have determined both with our most recent survey and some of the previous research is that most people are just coming and going. Even if the spot is called a 2-hour spot, people are rarely using it for 2 hours. So I think, you know, and part of what we were trying to do is also simplify so that we don't have 500 different regulations all over. So that's why we are trying to mostly have 2-hour parking, but there are still a few targeted 15-minute and half-hour spaces downtown. And, but I hear what you're saying. And so I think we can
I
look
just
at
think
Brandy Court
there's a
and see
lot
if,
of grab and go spots like everything but the dog, even Anya's pre-order, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of grab and go areas that as a convenience to our customers, so they're not searching and looping parking lots looking for a spot. If they saw that this was open and could just grab and go, that they'd be more apt to stop there and do that rather than go somewhere else.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And we are hoping that the overarching effect of all of the things that we're proposing tonight, including the lots, which we
Yeah.
haven't even gotten to, is going to make enough turnover happening downtown that it should just kind of work out. That's the goal. But
Yeah.
thank you. Hear that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So next up is Naomi Kaufman.
Hi, Naomi Kaufman, 64 Woburn Street, and thank you everybody for all the incredible work that you've put into this. I'm interested in hearing about the other recommendations that you have around other parking, but for this and talking about employee parking, the areas that you have circled on Woburn Street right now in blue, how are you proposing to change those?
So whereas most of that right now is 2-hour parking, it's going to be 2-hour parking or all day with employee permit.
Okay, so it is like that already in front of my house. So it's probably just the rest of the street that is other areas of the street.
Right.
I want to echo for different reasons because this is regulated, obviously, but Krista mentioned how people are using those spots. And I think in any of the areas where there is residential parking and people are parking in front of it, it's really, really important for safety reasons that people understand how far away from an apron cutout they should park, how close together they should be, how tight up to the curb, that they shouldn't park on the sidewalks, all of those things. I mean, it's an opportunity to get a cleaner start on this, and you're going to be doing education with people about this. And I think it's just really, really important to help that piece of the changes that are going to come into play. So, understand that the parking is going to be there and that's okay, but just to really help the residents and the people's cars that are parking there and the traffic flow through there. It's incredibly dangerous if people are not parking properly in those spots.
Thank you. That's great feedback, Naomi.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, next up is Mary Beth.
Oops, hi.
Hello.
Okay, it worked. I found out the meeting from my building owner, who is George McHugh. And I'm one of the people who live in this lovely old 1930s apartment building and have never in my life before lived where I did not have a parking place. I mean, we do have paid overnight parking at Knights of Columbus, but we have to be out of there in the morning and come back in the evening. And when you're a retired person, it's a load. It's a load, like, where do I go? And I can't park on the street near me. And I'm sorry, I didn't catch it, but it didn't sound like there was any talk about being able to have residents parking on Sanborn Street at all, with permits.
So that is not part of the current proposal, but we certainly did hear the feedback tonight. So, a little further discussion of Sanborn Street is certainly on our docket for our next meeting. We hear you.
Okay, all right. I don't take any more time because I know it's a complicated street, but it would just be deeply appreciated if we had a place.
All right, thank you.
Okay, next up is David Zeke.
Good evening, and thanks for holding this session. And I was glad to hear that you had made some arrangements for overnight parking. But with the number of condo and apartment dwellers downtown now. We get guests, out of town guests, and maybe children returning from school for the weekend, and I was wondering if you had made any or put any thought into longer term parking, like overnight or a few day parking. Wouldn't, in my mind, wouldn't have to be free, but it would have to be something within a reasonable distance for these unplanned cars. Have you thought about that?
So that's what just went before the select board last evening, because we did kind of break it out as a separate thing. So that Lincoln Street lot down by the commuter rail station is exactly for that. That is for overnight parking. It is free and people can go there. They just need to leave.
Did you hear my weekend part of that?
They can go there on the weekend too.
Overnight, but for like 48, 72 hours.
I don't know that anybody's trying to solve an out-of-town visitors 72-hour problem, honestly, but so that I don't think this committee was looking into that. That wasn't really sort of we're trying to solve more the day-to-day as opposed to somebody needing longer term parking. That's not something that I think we're in a position to solve.
Because you're not chartered to do it?
We are not chartered to do it, correct.
Okay, I think it's a real problem for Reading, but I guess we look elsewhere. Thank you.
And again, David, I would just comment that's a sort of CBDC issue, because the guidelines that they're establishing for the amount of parking per residential unit being built is generally speaking 1.25. Postmark was actually built with 1.44. But we've heard clearly from the residents that 1.86 is actually the cars that people own that need to park it. Now, there's been very vigorous debate about this whole subject, but in the zoning board, the CBDC is proposing new zoning regulations, and that's really where your comment and your efforts and your voice should be heard.
Right. But again, he's not even asking about resident parking, Bernie. He's asking for visitors coming for several days at a time. And I don't think CBDC can solve that either.
Again, it's clearly an issue with the development. There's no doubt about it that it's going to create more demands for parking where we already have a fixed amount. So we're adding more demand on a fixed base. Our focus was trying to, better utilize what we've already got, but absolutely we cannot control nor can we do anything about the future demand that's likely to happen.
Okay, thank
you.
you.
Enough.
Okay, thank you. The next up is Dave Reed.
Was it me or was it Naomi? Because I think she's been waiting longer, but I'm happy to go.
I think Naomi already spoke. I think her hand is just still up.
No, I actually do have one more question.
Oh, sorry.
Until after Dave goes. That's okay.
I heard about this from the town website. Appreciate everything you're doing, because this is on your own time, I'm assuming. Liz, if you're associated with the bookstore, we love it. I'm assuming that's no coincidence, but we're big fans and supporters of it.
Thank you.
Couple things. Well, I guess 2 comments to keep it short, so we're over. The Vine Street parking, is that's currently mostly the MBTA commuters that's changing to employees? I would caution you against that. If you change that, that means that those people parking for the train are going to be zipping around the residential streets trying to find parking. I'm one of those. I try and be conscientious about coming down to catch the train, but there are days when times are a little tighter and I'm not zipping or outrageously out of control. But if you can keep that for the MBTA parking, you keep those people out of the back roads there of parking. And there's a lot.
So Dave, what we've been seeing is that the actual parking lot right next to the station has been empty, like not been full ever in the last 2 years.
That one, yeah, because ridership's down because of the pandemic. So
correct.
In March, I'm going back to the office, and I'm worried about the parking down there starting to increase. I agree. It's empty now. It's times hopefully are going to change.
Yeah, so that's definitely one of the things where we're sort of like, we're trying to react to the moment of what is happening in terms of businesses changing the number of people that they're requiring to be in the office and how often. And, we are seeing more and more companies switching to more and more working from home or just being in part-time. And so, and one of our committee members also works with the MBTA, and they're seeing like their longer term projections anyway were for more variability in terms of when people were riding the train and how much. So we're thinking that that we're going to be pretty safe with the current level of commuter rail parking focused more around the station, and Vine Street should be, it should be okay right now to not include that based on what we've been researching and hearing.
Okay.
But we hear you. I mean, I don't think anybody's saying any decision that's made now would never be looked at again, right? If all of a sudden the whole world is heading back to the commuter rail all the time, then I think that would be reevaluated.
After someone that's written the MBTA for decades, plural, I don't trust many of their estimates. They've reduced the number of cars per train, and I could go on, and that's been hurtful, and it makes the trains packed. But I wouldn't go off their solely off their recommendation. They're not very accurate. They have also reduced the train schedule, so you're going to have a lot of impact with a lot of concentration of people trying to catch the 2 or 3 rush hour trains that they're offering now. So this place is going to get flooded and burst. So it's going to be a lot of people looking for spots. Me in March, I'm going back full time, 5 days a week, every week. And that's changing for a lot of other people. So right now I haven't been there for 2 years. Starting in March, I'm going to be there every day, 5 days a week. So that's just food for thought or input. My concern about changing the off parking lot to overnight is those people have to get out. So you have an influx of people, and you have people overnight that either won't move or that are going to be leaving after when people are coming in to catch the 2 6 a.m. trains or the 7:30 train.
I think it was made pretty clear at the meeting last night that people have to vacate by 6 o'clock or they will be towed.
Okay, well, fair enough. And then the one lateral thinking thing is I'm from the Chicago suburbs. I lived there for 30 years. So I have that perspective. I watched my hometown change to condos. They put up a parking garage to try and help this out. We have the Walgreens that's out of business. We have the Rite Aid. If the municipality could purchase one of those lands, especially the Walgreens, they have the parking lot behind it. That all could be constructed with obviously a big CapEx expenditure, but you could build that up into a paid parking lot that customers or even David Zeke and his overnight person could stay in overnight and just hopefully pay a nominal fee for parking, nothing outrageous like downtown prices.
Well, Dave, you're giving great foreshadowing for a later part of our presentation. So we will be talking parking garage a little later tonight.
Julie and Andrew, could you comment on I thought that we did not change that Vine Street property, those spaces from commuter, resident / commuter to overnight. Is that true?
Those aren't overnight. It's the Lincoln Street.
Yeah, but the Lincoln Street, right? But the Vine Street, I think that was always that was not resident only, if I recall. Just refresh my memory on that, Andrew or Julie.
So there are a few different areas on Vine Street with regulations. There's no parking further up Vine Street, and that's what we aren't proposed. Park wasn't proposing to change because it's quite a thin road, but I had thought at our last meeting, we looked at those 42 spaces that could be added to employee supply because it's where a lot of some specifically large businesses were looking to utilize. And that's what we had ended up recommended because we have 41 spaces here. So aligning more employee in this area seemed to make sense for some of those large businesses.
But to David's point, were they previously resident?
They are currently resident only, yes.
So that would have, so we are, I wasn't
completely full if we ever go back. They fill up quick and the spillover goes on the side streets. Goes on the
So I-
left, the Woburn there, goes on Prescott. You get a lot of people that spill over. So I know it's empty now, but the businesses I've talked to, the financial ones are going back to near full time here in the spring.
Well,
Yeah, sorry,
Dave, the
Dave,
Woburn and Prescott Street spaces heading up towards west are meant to be employee parking, resident parking for the train. They are regulated that way. They're signed that way.
Correct. I'm saying when Vine fills up, people spill over and go to Woburn and Prescott.
Right,
Vine-
which they're supposed to.
Right. So I'm just saying all those cars are going to go to looking on Woburn and Prescott and around for more.
And because we were proposing, Park was proposing to change some of these, we did look at some specific areas to try to add back some of those resident-only spaces along here closer to the depot. I mean, this is only 16 spaces compared to 41 plus, closer to 50 maybe. But we did try to realize that and add back some supply where we could.
This is
sorry.
a tough problem. I'm not trying to be debative.
No, no.
I apologize for missing earlier about the tow. I didn't hear that or I missed it. So
Oh, no worries.
Yeah, sorry, Dave. I thought that was not commuter parking. I've been the only kind of proponent on the committee for commuter parking for the most part. And so that one slipped by me. I thought that we were not reducing that as commuter earlier, but maybe we'll have to rethink that and make it dual purpose for, resident and employee.
yeah, I've overused my time, but my worry
Thank
about permanent parking on there, I think that's a bus route too. And those buses come flying down there. So if there's snow and cars parked there, it could get a little interesting for the buses flying down there. They move
Thank
pretty.
you.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions for this segment?
I'm not seeing any other hands raised at this time, Liz.
All right. Let me throw
Oh,
it
actually,
to my
I'm
pal
sorry.
Karen.
I'm sorry. I
Oh.
see George McHugh has his hand raised again.
So sorry.
Yep. George.
Thank you. Since I started the conversation in this particular piece, which is of great interest to me, and thank you, Mary Beth, one of my residents, for jumping in there and saying the same thing. I don't want to reiterate what I was saying, but then I heard a lot of other things, and it just reinforces you have a tremendous challenge here, trying to meet the needs of the commuters that require parking, as Dave was just championing, and the employees that need parking to support our businesses, et cetera. But I still have to just finish by saying residents of Reading, in my case, for my plea, we need to have some overnight parking, and we need to have some permit parking, and we need to have some relief, because it's not 1935, for all the reasons that we've been talking about, all the prosperity and the planning boards, whether it's a miscalculation or a misstep or throwing a curveball by the developer, but 1.25 parking spaces for people. As much as we want to or wish that it would happen, we're not ready to have everybody on public transportation or riding bikes. We need parking. And I'm just advocating for putting the residents first in a lot of your decisions. And I appreciate you giving me some time to start and to finish on my position. Thank you so much.
Thanks, George. Thanks for coming. All right. And with that, I think I'm throwing it over to Karen to talk about parking lots. You thought street parking was fun. Just wait until our parking lot section. Hold on to your hat.
Yeah, I have been tasked to talk about the public parking kiosks. Please be kind. So with all the conversations going with the lack of parking and the discoveries that we found with the surveys is that a lot of short turnover is what a lot of the lots are using. And a big problem, as we've all discussed, was employees taking up the spaces. It's been unmonitored for a couple of years. And now that have a great what's the word? Now that we have someone who's giving out tickets and making everybody crazy, it's a good discussion to talk about our proposal for kiosks in 2 parking lots. Our proposal is to put 2 kiosks in each of the lots, one behind CVS and one in Brandy Court. They're going to be solar operated, so they can be moved around, and they have a lot of flexibility that way. As we've said, the goal is to increase the turnover and keep parking available for short-term parkers. We can create any kind of parking element that we want. The first hour is proposed to be free, which would satisfy a lot of people wanting free parking. We're not going to change the free parking that exists on the outer side of the town just for these lots. So for the first hour being free, if you're only there for 15, 20 minutes, it's not going to impact you at all. But it will also give businesses and customers the option to stay longer if they want. If they want to visit more than one place, it in 2 hours wasn't going to be enough. They can pay for more time and not have to worry about rushing back and feeding a meter or worry about getting a ticket. We have a lot of flexibility with how we can price out the spaces. All the lots would be unregulated, like in the streets after 5, but for restaurants and things like that, they wouldn't have to pay. The kiosks come with the option to use an app, or you can go up to the kiosk itself and pay with coins or cards or your app, and it's very user-friendly. We can make changes at any time. We could make the lots get more expensive as the more hours go on, or we can make it more expensive on a Friday or a Monday, or in a couple of years, if it's working really, really well, we can lower the price or raise the price. There's a lot of flexibility, like I said. The system that we decided we wanted to go with was a pay-by-plate system, which offered a lot more flexibility and ease of use for the user. You didn't have to get a ticket from the kiosk and put it in your windshield on your car. You can either enter the information on your phone on an app or go up to the kiosk, either way. And we would use the same, a very popular app, the pay-by-phone app, which is used by the MBTA. A lot of other towns use it as well. So for consistency and ease of use, we would try and stick with that. Julie got a lot of information from other towns that have implemented these kinds of proposals or these kinds of kiosks, and we're going to learn a lot by their mistakes and what they had done. So that's been very helpful with the information she's gotten. We've made our decisions based on some of the feedback from the towns, so that it'll be very smooth and easygoing. Next slide. As part of this, we need to pay for it. So we have voted to recommend to the select board that we request $110,000 to cover the costs for the purchase, the installation, the license plate recognition component. And we added around 25-30% contingency because the cost of things are going up all the time. So we didn't want to ask for too little money. We wanted to ask for what we thought would be the right amount of money. The estimated payback, depending on how many people pay for parking or how many people stay longer periods of time, will be about 1 to 3 years. So the expectation is that it won't really cost the town anything because we're going to be returning the money to the town once we pay it back. There's a huge potential for growth and for money to be generated by these kiosks. Not that that's the goal, but we could develop a parking benefit district or some kind of a fund that all the money would go into that would help keep the kiosks going, help with regulations, help with lighting, help with other downtown beautification things. There's a lot of benefits for it making money, and as the town grows and as the needs get bigger, the town has to move forward. We're getting all these new complexes and all these new buildings, and we are getting great businesses into town, and we want to support the businesses, and the way to support them is to have turnover. So the way to get turnover is to be able to get the spaces to turn over and over again during the day. So this is a really good win-win to get that done. What we will be able to do, there is a component where the license plate recognition part of it is. The police department deputy, she spoke to us about the privacy concerns, and that's something that she would have to speak to you all about, but there's lots of things embedded in it to ensure privacy to the users, and we would be able to collect data through the police department, not on our own, to figure out what our real future needs will be and whether or not they're working in the most efficient, effective way. And We also learned a lot from the information that Julie provided us from the other towns of what they didn't look into. They didn't necessarily know how much it would cost to maintain them, and collections of the funds and customer service to help repair the kiosks if they needed repair. So we really feel that we've done a lot of research and a lot of discussion about the proper way to use these so that they'll be incredibly effective. And we at the beginning of our meetings, I can't say that everybody was on board with the kiosks, but after a lot of discussion and discussing all the parking needs and the desires of the town and the turnover that's needed, we all really, most of us came to the consensus that this is a really win-win for the town. Is there another slide after this? I don't think so. So there's the question and answer.
Just a reminder to everyone, if you want to ask a question, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom, which is found under reactions. We have Dave Reed with his hand raised.
It's gentle, Karen. Is there, with the business owners on here, is there any concern about charging currently free?
You broke up. Is there any concern of what?
Sorry, is there any concern with, especially with the business users? Am I breaking up still?
A little bit, but keep going.
Is there any concern from the business owners that you're charging for a lot that's currently free?
I had talked to, and I'm sure Liz can also speak to this, but I had talked to a few businesses that I visit frequently, and their major concern was to make sure that there was free parking, and there will still be free parking on the streets. And the parking is technically free in the lot for up to an hour. So it's not necessarily taking away the free parking. It's some of the people I talked to, my hairstylist, she thought people, they come in for 2 hours. She wants them to at least have an option to be able to park for 2 hours for free. And we're still not getting rid of the 2-hour spaces that are on the street. So that satisfied her. Liz, you might have something else to say.
Sure. Yeah. So Dave, definitely. I'm a business owner. Dan on the park committee is a business owner. Chris is a business owner. Tom is a business owner. So we definitely had that perspective. I mean, and I'll say I'm a resident here for 20 years, as well as a business owner for the last 4 and a half. And so, yeah, I have a vested interest in making sure that my customers can get to my business easily. And I feel confident that, particularly from the survey data and all the input we've been getting, most people come downtown for less than an hour. And so if you keep the lots free for up to an hour, then if people zip in and out of there, terrific. On the occasion that people do come downtown and want to go to lunch and then do a little shopping, or they want to go to lunch and have their hair done, or they want to shop and have their hair done, we wanted to make sure we could empower people to have an option where it's like, you know what, you can pay a few bucks and know that you can leave your car in one spot for 4 hours and you don't have to move it. You don't have to be like, I'm at the 2-hour mark, I got to run and move my car. So as a business owner, for me, I feel that this is a great solution of there's plenty of free parking. As Karen said, the street parking all remains as it is. The lots up to the first hour are free. And then if you need something longer, then you're empowered to give yourself that opportunity for a nominal fee. So I feel good about it.
Okay. Rachel O'Neill has her hand raised again. Rachel.
Hi there. Totally for the kiosks and paying. I think it will definitely help with the turnover, and love that we'll have more space. My question is, I know the town was looking into and had been researching having some designated spots for EV charging stations. I didn't know if that was something that the town is still looking into, or if we had designated spots for, because I know they were looking into a couple of particular spots directly next to my shop and in other areas because of like electrical and they were going to offer, intensive if you have an electric vehicle, you can park here longer kind of thing.
Julie, can you speak to that? Or Chris, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I can take care of it, Karen. Well, to a point. Yes, there is 3 locations that we're outlined for the EV charging. It's the library, outside of Christopher's restaurant, that Bank of America little strip over there. And then another spot that I won't be able to mention, but Julie will be able to mention it. And I do not believe there was a fee for, I believe the spot is free, and then obviously you have to pay to charge your car, whatever the nominal fee is for that. So I think that the way that it's regulated is you're being charged for as long as you're plugged in. So if you leave your car plugged in there and you don't pull it out after 2 hours or something, then you're getting dinged from the charging side of it. So Julie, you can mention the other spot. So I'm
Yeah,
precluded from
sure.
mentioning.
So, yeah, my understanding is that there would be EV charging also located down by the depot. In the cursor is exactly where the cursor or the hand is showing on the screen right now.
Does that answer your question, Rachel?
Yep, it does.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Julie, who was next? Was it Mary Ann?
Yes, Mary Ann Downing.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, because my AirPods are dying. So I had a question about the revenue projections for the kiosks. And specifically with the CVS lot, my understanding is, unless things have changed, for the 18 to 20 Woburn Street construction that's on the ramp going in, that they're going to be using some of the CVS lot for staging. And how soon are the kiosks expected to be going in? I mean, would this be going in after that, immediately after town meeting might authorize to purchase them?
Julie, you might have to answer this, or Chris.
Sure. Yeah. So we had put together and Park had reviewed sort of a, I guess, hope for a timeline. If the funding is approved at town meeting, we would then have to do a lot of vetting of the different vendors and then the coordinating of the contract and installation and purchase and installation. So we were hoping that we might be able to roll it out at some point, like in January 2023. And we would, obviously look to try to coordinate with anything else that's happening in the area so that we don't put them in and then have to move them immediately. Karen did note one benefit of the kiosks. The goal is to purchase, well, the plan is to purchase kiosks that are solar powered so that if needed, they can be more easily moved.
Okay, and just kind of on the theme of construction parking. I mean, I think anyone who was downtown in the last couple of years really saw the impact of construction workers parking on Haven and Gould for the Postmark and Ace Flats projects. And so now we have these are smaller scale projects mostly, right? There's the 1820 Woburn, there's going to be Chute Street, something's before Historical Commission down at the former Walgreens. And then there's another project coming before you that's over at 128 Tire. I know it's a little out of the area, but what my concern is that the construction workers are going to be there early enough to kind of glom onto lots of street spots, and there wasn't good parking enforcement of preventing them from doing that before. And so then residents who might want a street spot for something will only be left with kiosk spots if they can find them. So I guess the question, it's a little tied into kiosks. I mean, maybe you've got to make the construction workers come in and pay, but what's the town's plan to manage? Because clearly the workers have to be there. They have to have their tools nearby. And we have to live through this to get the new residents that will patronize all the businesses. But it's going to be another couple of years of them taking up all the spots, a lot of spots during the day. Is there any, did the park committee discuss that?
We did not.
We had a lot of discussions about that. I'm sorry, go ahead, Karen.
We did not discuss those plans specifically. And that's a really great point that you're raising. We did talk about construction parking, and if my memory serves correctly, I think that that is something that takes place during the development discussion permitting process, as far as telling them where to park and things like that. Julie and Chris, can you talk on that?
Yes, that's correct. So typically when a project is ready to come in for a building permit, we have what we call a pre-construction meeting, which includes members of all staff departments that are involved in plan review and that have any sort of oversight over aspects of the public realm that might be impacted by construction. And at that time, we advise the site supervisor and any of the primary contractors of locations where their contractors can park. And then there is ongoing enforcement throughout projects if contractors aren't parking in the locations they're supposed to park. And many sites that are larger actually tell us they're going to accommodate contractor parking on their own site. Some of the smaller sites, we advise that they use the lot that's down as you enter the back end of what used to be Rite Aid. I think it's a Walgreens now that goes into like the Market Basket Plaza. There are some spaces down there.
Yeah, I mean, that would make sense, but what I would see with Postmark, especially because I bank at Eastern Bank, and so I would be down there fighting for things, is, the workers, they have to have their tools nearby. So they're not going to go way over, past McDonald's to go come work on Haven Street or like Main Street for the Chronicle. So I don't know whether there's workers can shuttle, but I think that's going to put a wrench in the plans, like literally and figuratively. And so,
yes,
and
they should.
that's just mainly my
Sorry,
comment is the construction. Thank you.
I think we have a really good position now because we didn't have enforcement before, and we do have enforcement now. So we had a lot of construction vehicles parking on Upper Sanborn and on Linden for a long period of time, but it was in the middle of the pandemic, so it didn't really matter. Nobody was going anywhere. But now that we have enforcement, as some people will say, the person's being very effective. So I'm hopeful that will also feed into the success of the whole plan.
Yeah, just one last thing. So the enforcement, it's not going to be okay. The construction company will just write it off and pay tickets, and they'll still keep parking there. Like it's not. We'll really like say no. Hey, we've told you you can't park on this street, and paying tickets isn't enough. We're gonna stop letting you do construction. Like there kind of has to. It would be nice if the plan was locked in at the time the permit was approved, because I think friends who live near the Met would say, well, they'll just pay the tickets. They don't care. They'll build it into the contract cost.
Very good point.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ann.
If I could just add one. Oh, Bernie, go ahead.
No, I was just going to comment that Mary Ann, I think almost every point that you made were exactly the points that were made in our discussions. And, the only other comment is that we really don't have a lot of good answers at the end of the day to your, to the very valid points that you're making. It's going to be disruptive. There's no doubt about it. So we'll do the best we can manage, but yeah, that's all. That's all I'd.
I think just to piggyback off that, I think that by us doing the up to an hour for free and then $1 an hour thereafter, I think that something should be capped at like 6 hours, because, hair appointments and all that, I can understand 4 hours-ish. But I think the 6 hour thing would end up bleeding into where the contractors would just park there anyway for like, that's, like $6 or something like that. So I think we have to do some kind of change at our next meeting where we think that 6+ hours is, some other price or something like that, where it's clearly, meant that these parking lots aren't for you to park there all day, and anybody, just because a construction worker doesn't have ladders and all this other stuff, you don't know what kind of vehicle they have, kind of thing. So it's just good feedback for our next meeting where we can just discuss the pitfalls of just changing something as well.
Well, the kiosks will allow us to increase the cost per hour after a certain point in time. And I think we were presenting that to the select board to begin, when they make the final decision. So it is definitely something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Deterrent.
Thank you much.
Who's next, Julie?
Caroline Gauthier.
Hi, Caroline.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for all your great recommendation. I am a resident of Reading and I have a business at 52 Haven Street. I'm really appreciative that the committee is trying to keep the parking for our patrons and our employee outside the inner core. So thank you so much for considering this. For the kiosk, I have a question of, I know from your survey, you saw that most of the patrons are less than 30 minutes in the kind of downtown area. In terms of my patient population, I guess you guys came up with the hour. I thought that there was also a discussion of potentially making it free for the first 2 hours. And just to give you an example of, I serve a large population of seniors in our Reading, being a podiatrist, and a lot of my patients use the Brandy Court lot in the back. And I just want to, for a scenario, a lot of my elderly patients walk really slow, come in from the back door, come in the office, sit for a little while. We try to run our office on time. Then we walk them in the room, help them take their shoes off. We care for them, do the recommendation. Then we, put their shoes back on, walk them to the front office, make an appointment. They pull their calendar. They have to ask, this question. So I'm a little concerned for my elderly population that try to keep their care local and support my business. That the hour might be just a little tight, and I don't want to be, they'll be stressed that they need to come out. They don't know how to use a kiosk, an app, and for them, it's technology that's a little bit probably more difficult for them. If there was consideration just to make it like 2 hour free for that area, and potentially kind of increasing, starting the kiosk for more long-term patrons or people who wants to park local. So I just wanted to share a concern of the bulk of my patients are local seniors, that an hour in and out of their appointment might make it a little tight and stressful for them. So
Thank you. That's a really good suggestion for that lot, actually, because there's not as quick a turnover in that lot as there is in the CVS lot, from what I can see. But we'll talk about that we'll talk about that.
Okay. Thank you.
So I accidentally skipped over a few people who were in line. My apologies. The next up is Nicole Harrington.
Hi, thank you. I actually, well, just first to introduce myself, I'm one of the owners at PDA Dental Group, which is right next to Caroline's practice. I'm at 54 Haven Street. And I would just like to echo exactly what she said. With regard to our patient appointments, we have orthodontic patients, adult patients, and children coming in for their pediatric appointments. And oftentimes our appointments do run longer than 1 hour. So I just, for the same exact reasons that she just spoke of, would really like you to consider the 2 hour option for free parking with the kiosks. I think that our patients would really appreciate that and find that much more convenient. Oftentimes they also are trudging in with 3 and 4 children and infants. And I think to stand there with the kiosk could be a little bit frustrating. So the 2 hours I think would be amazing, very convenient for our patients.
Thank you, Nicole.
On one other topic, sorry, was someone trying to speak? I had just one other question, slightly going back to the on-street parking topic, but I was very appreciative of seeing that you did increase some of the employee access spots that we spoke of. I know Dr. Smith from Dowd had voiced concerns at the last meeting with regard to her practice having a large number of employees and needing additional employee spots. And we at PDA are exactly in the same position. So I love seeing that there's additional employee access to parking, a little bit outside of the center of downtown. That will be great for us. One concern I do have is that the parking passes, at least to my current knowledge, we've only been allotted 5 employee passes. And on any given day, we have approximately 30 employees within the practice. And our biggest concern at this point would be, are we going to have access to additional employee passes? Or if that has been considered with respect to business size and number of employees that businesses have on staff.
Liz?
Yes, Nicole, absolutely. So part of the goal in increasing the inventory of employee spaces was being able to therefore also increase the number of employee permits available to businesses. So there will still probably need to be some level of tiering of, allowing a certain amount to go to make sure that all businesses have a shot at them, and then another round, much like now, they sort of let everybody get a certain amount before they let people get more. So Deputy Chief Amendola is definitely, a big part of this conversation about how we're managing the permits, because of course it's through the police station that they get allocated. So absolutely the goal is for many more permits to be available to businesses that need them. So, stay tuned for final numbers, but that's absolutely the intent.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You bet.
And don't forget, Nicole, that we also made sure that we tried to keep as much unregulated space as possible within a relatively short distance from your office and Dowd as well. So we can't, I think the problem we have is that we're trying to balance the needs. We have maybe 50 business owners downtown and their employees. We'll probably have 250 or so employee passes on an inventory of about 2,400 spaces in total. Of course, we have 22,000 plus residents in Reading. And, we need to balance the needs of the employees and the business owners, who are a very small percentage of the total residents. And that's the balancing act that we've got to try to, and everybody's got to basically cooperate. So even if you can't get an employee space, the employees can also take advantage of a lot of unregulated. And that's part of our education, I think, that we need to communicate to the business owners.
Thank you. That's actually great that you're pointing that out. So when I look at the map that you presented tonight, all of the streets with no colors on them at all, those are unregulated. Is that correct?
And we talked about they're close to your business.
Correct. Okay, perfect.
And Nicole, to Bernie's point, also, just knowing that you're near to the train station, all the resident spots that are resident only until 9:30, I don't know, I know you guys open early, but if you have any employees who are on shifts, if you have people coming in later, there's a lot of spaces currently available starting from 9:30, 10:30.
Yes, absolutely. That's actually been very helpful for our employees that come in later in the day. Our tough time is that we open at 7 a.m. So most employees arriving at 6:30 a.m.
Yeah.
We just don't have really a feasible option for them. And oftentimes the clinical staff treating patients, it's just difficult for them to find time to leave midday to move their car.
Of course.
So that's been the challenge. Yeah.
So yeah, hopefully we'll get, plenty of these employee spaces in play for you, and more permits, and there will be.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Nicole.
Okay, next up is Naomi Kaufman.
Hi again. In light of the new developments that are percolating in town, how did the committee consider the existing 300-foot rule to public lots and the increasing pressure that new development will put on parking requirements?
As Bernie kind of mentioned before, that 300-foot rule, that's a regulation within the CPDC. That's not anything that we are empowered to address.
But we definitely noted that is a real issue that's creating more stress on the available parking, no doubt about it.
Okay, so the results from all of the work and survey work and research that you've done, will you be able to provide some observations or recommendations to the CPDC around that? I mean, because at the end of the day, it impacts the parking supply and demand.
Yeah, happily, one of our members is on the CPDC, and also Julie and Andrew from Town Hall work with the CPDC, so they are getting all of this real time, you can be sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Liz Sullivan.
Hi, Liz. Hi, Liz.
Liz, you'll need to unmute yourself. Oh, good.
She is unmuted. Can you hear?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Perfect. John Sullivan, and actually I'm Liz Sullivan's lesser half. I was hoping that the group could go into a little bit more depth on how you came up with the estimate for that 1 to 3 year payback on the parking kiosks. So what we've heard from the survey was that most people who are parking downtown are there for less than an hour. And then there's also all this outside of those parking lots, there's a whole bunch of 2-hour parking. The people that are paying to park in the lot are either people who are going to be there for more than 2 hours, or who really don't want to walk very far to get to where they're shopping. And then I just did some just back of the envelope calculations, and I feel like what I came up with is pay back that $110,000 in 3 years. We're going to need to average $100 a day in parking fees, 365 days a year for 3 years. I'm just wondering if you think there's enough people to raise that $100 a day every day parking downtown, and where that number came from, and how confident are you that there's that many people that actually want to pay to park downtown?
Yeah, I think Dave, I'm sorry. It was a Dave. I'm sorry. What's your name?
John, sorry.
John, sorry. Yeah, I certainly, as somebody who's dealt with spreadsheets for about 4 decades, I did have exactly the same question, and I would agree that the number that we've talked about has not been fully calculated correctly, because partly the reason is because we haven't settled on how much time will be free, right? So if you say it's an hour free, that gives you one result. If you say it's 2 hours free, you get a very different result. But I would agree with you. I think that the so-called payback is not going to be as quick as our initial estimates that have been published have shown. So I think you're right on that.
So if I can jump in, the estimates were provided by the NYGARD estimate report, Julie, and they gave several different components to what the estimates would be based on an 8-hour day from 8 to 5, so many cars parking, so many free. Their original estimate was that they wanted it to be 30 minutes free, not an hour. And we decided as a group that we wanted it to be an hour. The kiosk can change at any time. It's not a money issue necessarily. It's more of a turnover issue that we're trying to solve. But the numbers were not something, some numbers it would be paid off in a year, but we have no idea how many people are going to pay to park. And we have no idea how many people are going to park for 4 hours or for 2 hours, so we really don't know. So that's why it's a pretty big span from 1 to 3 years, because we really won't know until they get installed and people start using them. Julie, I don't know if you want to add to that at all, or Liz?
No, I think you did a good job, Karen. Thanks. And I'm happy to talk offline with anyone and share, like for anyone who hasn't seen the projected revenues that were put together by Nelson Nygaard, the consultant. I'm happy to send that and share it and talk offline with anyone about it. But there are a lot of assumptions that were baked into that back when it was done a couple of years ago that have been adjusted a little bit as Park has worked through the process. And so it's not 100% accurate, but it's, the projected payback of 1 to 3 years, we feel pretty good about.
Some of us.
And also, Julie, I'll just say that you also, as you have discussed with other towns that implemented these kiosks, that frankly, again, had no intention of making money. They were just sort of like, we need to do this for behavior change. Every single town was surprised by like, oh, these are actually making us money. So while it's fair to say that these projections are based on assumptions that are not yet tried, we feel pretty confident that we're not sure exactly when, but the kiosks will ultimately pay for themselves.
And they will ultimately start providing great funds for beautifying downtown.
If I could just chime in. Sorry, Bernie.
No, go ahead.
If I could just chime into John's point for doing the math on that, breaking it down to where you end up mentioning that it's going to be $100 a day for, 365 days a year. When I see that number, I think it's highly realistic that we'd be able to hit that. as opposed to looking at it and seeing $60,000, I believe is what Julie had mentioned on the spreadsheets that we looked at. But I think $100 a day with downtown is easily going to be met for 365 days a year. So thank you.
I don't think the assumption was for 365 of revenue. It was more just working Monday through Friday. But that's what the analysis. But we can look. I mean, you could have it go either way, right? Some people might say, I'm going to buy the space for all day, and you could have a situation where all the spaces are tied up for all day by people who want to pay it, or you could have the natural demand. If it's less than 2 hours, or a lot of it's less than an hour, you know your revenue will likely fall short of the projections in the Nelson Nygaard assessment, because they never assumed that there would be any turnover in the spaces. But we can go over that offline.
Okay. If you are all done, who's next?
Next up is Angela Binda.
Hi, Angela.
Hi, thank you. First, I want to thank everyone for their hard work on this issue. I think it's auspicious that we're talking about downtown parking on Groundhog Day. As far as the kiosks go, I didn't think that I would agree with them, but I see the proposal that you've put forth and it seems reasonable. The one thing I'd like to say is that I would agree with others who have suggested that it be 2 hours free. I don't think we want to discourage people from exploring or wandering or browsing or being afraid if they run into friends that they have to rush back to their car or get a ticket. So I think 2 hours free to start off with would be great. And you could probably even at some point work with the chamber to have some sort of promotions. You could do free parking for daytime shop the block during the holidays. You could have a validation program that if you make 10 purchases at 10 local shops, you get an hour free parking or other things. But thank you for your work.
Thank you, Angela.
Next up is Brendan Connor.
Hi, Brendan.
Thank you, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I guess my big concern, and not so much a concern, but a question was how the decision to make it just the parking lots that were going to be paid. Because I think the nightmare scenario in my head thinking about this is that, you're going to have the parking lots that are well managed and maybe even empty at times while people circle and put their flashers on and wait for those free spots, even just to save like $1, and that's just, I think, the example I'd use is I previously lived in Malden, and Malden had 2 big parking garages, like huge parking garages that were pretty much empty outside of commuters, and they were free for most weekends and evenings and things like that. But you would still see, despite that, people waiting for those street parking spots that you actually had to pay for. And, I think I do worry that, with the, the convenience aspect of being closer, but the free spots are going to be, higher in demand just because that's, people will go miles outside their drive just to avoid a $1 toll. And I just worry about the same thing happening and leading to more traffic issues and things like that, because we're charging for one spot, but not others.
So the free spots have a time limit on them.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are 30 minutes, some of them are 2 hours. So I see your point, but I think we discussed this at length that the freer spaces would probably turn over faster, and the enforcement is a big part of it. It's a lot easier to enforce the parking lots with the kiosks, and the enforcement could spend more time in the free parking spaces as opposed to the lots. So if that makes any sense, again, we won't know till we start.
Mm-hmm.
But the thought is that the free spots are there and the turnover will happen because turnover in the big lots is going to be greater than it is now. So that's the whole goal to the whole thing is, and technically the big lots will be free if you're only there for an hour, which based on the survey data, most people are. except for dentists and doctors and hair salons or whatever. But the data was directing us to say, I'm only down here for 15 minutes. And if they're only down there for 15 minutes, you'll probably see a lot of turnover in the spaces that are free, because they're not going to want to go into the lots to even for free. So again, it's we'll have to see what happens.
Let's see. All right. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments, though. I didn't know that about the garages. That's a good point.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thanks.
I did want to point out that Tom O'Connor, member of Park, has his hand raised. Tom.
Hi, Tom.
Hello, good evening. Julie, thank you. My opinion on this subject is that I am not in favor of the kiosks, and I'd like to share my reasons why I'm not in favor of it. I am a business that has resided downtown for over 40 years. And I think that to educate people from free parking to a kiosk is a challenging event. I also think that we are at times, both the lots that we're talking about, I will acknowledge, do fill up. But I think that as some are aware, that we are in the process of hiring a parking enforcement officer that I think will be able to move the traffic in both these lots. Having watched it in the last few weeks post-Christmas, January, the lot that I would look at is CVS, and it doesn't get very full at all during the day. I've yet to find any time of day that it is full. I'd also like to point out that the kiosks are going to end or be unregulated after 5 o'clock, which I think means that someone could get in at 4 o'clock and be there for the evening without having to move. So I feel that for my customers and for the customers that come downtown, we're offering an hour free. And we're stating that in the survey, people come down and seem to move pretty quickly down there. So I'd like to speak as a resident of Reading also, besides being a business owner. I just think the expense of $110,000 for this project, that like some that have expressed, I have concern on the time of payment back, because I think it's not going to generate $100 every day, 7 days a week. And I appreciate the committee allowing me to voice my opinion on this subject matter. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Is that all of them, Julie?
Yes, let me just scroll through real quick and see if there's anyone interested in. Okay, I think that's, yep, I think that's everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
So the topic was brought up previously about structured parking, about parking garages, and that is a topic that we on the park committee did talk about. I know that, you know, in the 20 years that I've been involved in development in downtown Reading, there has always been a discussion about the possibility of a parking garage, and there has never been a study, a detailed study on structured parking in the feasibility of it on the different public lots that the town owns. We have had I think 2 different parking studies done over the past, 10, 12 years or so, and really focused on some of the same things that we have focused in the park committee about how to utilize the existing spaces that we have the most effectively. But right, constantly and for good reason, always interest of whether there is a possibility, whether it is feasible to build a structured parking. The one that comes up most often is the what we call the CVS lot. Taking a real cursory look at that lot, there is the possibility that we could fit a parking garage in there. Right now, there's about 50 spots. You could get another 50 spots or so on top of that. There are some, whether it's that spot or somewhere else, there's complications with constructing a structured parking. First and foremost, right, the cost of doing it. Structured parking is not cheap. There's the question of just the pure feasibility, the circulation that's required, and specifically on the CVS lot. That lot serves as a loading zone and as access to some property that is not public. There's some other private spaces there, so we couldn't take up the entire space. But instead of getting into the details, really what the park committee is recommending is that a feasibility study be done to look at structured parking, a public structured parking somewhere in downtown, or maybe not all the spaces, but to investigate the different spaces that are possible. That town hall, the commuter rail lots, Brandy Court, CVS lot, I think are the 4 that have been brought up in the past, to look at things like that I just talked about: feasibility, cost, what demand, what market would each of those serve. Certainly if there was a structured parking built down by one of the commuter rail lots, that would serve a different market than one up on at town hall, for example. And of the lots, of the locations that are feasible, do we really need to be providing that much parking, at that cost? We're not saying we do. We're not saying we don't. But I think it makes sense at this point to look at that. We're also, I think it's important. I know a lot of the park members wanted to make sure that we communicate that we don't see, structured parking takes a long time, right? We would be just at the feasibility stage. You got to figure out money, feasibility, design, all that sort of thing. So this is really a question about the long term. And Park was really focused on the short term, on figuring out these parking the parking regulations. So we're not seeing a parking garage as the solution to these particular issues that we have grappled with and talked through today. But, looking out into the future, we ought to make sure that we're leveraging and using our public property, to serve the town the best that they can. We did talk that, there are other benefits that structured parking could create in town. I know when was that? A few weeks ago, right? There was a lot of discussion about overnight parking in one of our meetings, and specifically as it comes to as related to parking during snowstorms. And, structured parking certainly would provide a big benefit in that context. And also, it could be designed to provide, there are other ideas, right? Whether it's a place for solar power, or whether a park, sort of green space could be constructed on the top level. Those are the sorts of things that we could explore as a community. But to get back to the recommendation of this committee is for the town to hire a consultant to do a feasibility study to really understand the possibilities. And so then we could further a conversation about, if that's something the town wants to spend money on, and how it would, what needs it would meet. And so, yeah, that was our, I think, summarizes our discussion about structured parking.
And the next slide jumps back to overnight. So Chris, if I could just ask you to re-summarize what was discussed last night and the next steps related to that, that would be great.
Yep, thanks, Andrew. So yeah, for overnight parking, town staff and the select board are working to find a specific location that might allow for overnight parking, temporary trial basis. So what ended up happening last night at the select board is, on the recommendation from the PTTF, at that meeting, it was mentioned to have the parking over at the commuter rail. So that is up for discussion at a February 15th public meeting where people can voice concerns and whatnot. And depending on how that goes, it would just be the overnight parking ban would be lifted in that location, but the 35 spots that people would have to leave once again by 6 a.m. in the morning or risk being towed. So that's where we're at with the overnight parking.
And just if there's Q&A on the structured parking, please remember to use the raise hand feature and under reactions. I see a few raised hands, first being Naomi Kaufman.
Hi, thanks again. John, your slide on the structured parking, prior research, as I understand it, other rounds prior to the park committee, while there clearly was a challenge for parking, there didn't seem to justify enough demand for parking structure. So can you speak to what and I absolutely appreciate that this park committee has a charter and that what happens with structured parking is kind of the next step. But what about the data that would even suggest that we would even be thinking about structured parking? So before we're out looking around for where the best place could be, how much demand is there for something like that?
Well, so there is definitely, I'm going to say, a difference of opinion within the park committee about the future demand, and some of that depends on what else happens in terms of development downtown, and what sort of businesses populate the downtown. So right, depending on what the business is, right. A lawyer's office doesn't require too much parking, but if that same space is, the classic one is like a Dunkin' Donuts, they do require a lot of parking, or at least a lot of circulation. So it sort of depends on sort of how our downtown evolves in terms of what the demand is. And so there's not a clear a clear set of numbers that we can point to, Naomi, about what that demand is. And I know that, right, the studies that happened in the past said there is sufficient there's sufficient parking if it was managed well within downtown, and I don't want to speak for the entire park committee, but I think that there were certainly a handful that does think that there's sufficient parking right now. But as I mentioned, right, this is a long term, right? We're probably talking, 7 to 10 years by where we are right here with an idea in order to get a parking garage actually funded, built, designed and built. And so it seems like the time to have that discussion,
Okay.
so that we can make those decisions with data instead of with perceptions.
Yeah, okay, so I guess I would just ask the town to, both from the committee's perspective in terms of recommendations, and then other people who are on this call that have different roles in the town, that even before we decide to invest money in a consultant to study location for parking, that we consider all of the research that's already been done on parking demand and some amount of projections forward, so that we're doing it based on need, not just based on let's shop and find where the right place could be for a parking lot. That's my request for that. And then, of course, I'm sure that it will get the heck studied out of it to make sure that we choose the right option.
Yeah, and maybe I didn't explain it 100% correctly, but right, the idea is certainly that any study that needs to be done wouldn't just be like an engineering study of which lot can fit a parking garage. It absolutely needs to have that demand component about, who are we trying to serve if there was a parking lot on this site, and what would that demand be? So yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for your time. I really appreciate it.
If I could just add one comment to that, if I could, John.
Sure.
Yeah, there was a lot of back and forth whether or not the parking garage, et cetera, is warranted. And believe me, I've been over this numerous times where I'll get the same thing from businesses that I visited. Yes, there should be a parking garage. No, there shouldn't be. This has been talked about for 40 years now. It's never going to happen, et cetera. And I understand the pros and cons with it. I think it's more of, if what we're instituting now is correct, where the prior data said we do have enough parking, we have to be able to manage it. If the implementation that we're doing now is correct and it all works out, then we don't even have to get the parking garage or any of that to begin with. I mean, that's the ultimate goal. We don't want to go and spend $7 million on something we don't need. I completely agree with that. But if what we institute does not end up working, or we see that there's more of a demand than there should be, I mean, this would only be in the the feasibility study phase. We don't want to be going through this another 10 years from now, where somebody else says, why don't we get a parking garage? And it's like, I remember that guy a decade ago said the same thing. So it's more of, hopefully what we institute here is correct. Everything works out. There's parking spots. Everyone comes downtown, and everything works out. So it's not anything set in stone, but a decision has to get made one way or another. If there's no spot for a parking garage because fire trucks, et cetera, all that stuff can't happen, then it's never going to happen. But at least we know, and then a decade from now, the next person knows it can't be done. That's all that we're trying to get at. So hopefully the parking, we end up solving all of this. Everything's great. If not, I still think that, something has to be done to put it to bed once and for all. But I do appreciate your concern, and other members did share that sentiment as well, Naomi. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Next up, Angela Binda.
Thank you. I had some questions similar to Naomi's about even having a feasibility study done, because I do remember the Nelson Nygaard study that was done that said we had the proper we had the right we had sufficient parking, it needed to be managed, and people had to get out of the habit of thinking they have to park right in front of the business that they want to go to. I'm wondering though, when this says, you know, findings, recommendations, hire a consultant, is this something that would be going to town meeting or to the select board and then to town meeting to fund like in the near future? Or is this, I know the parking garage would be long-term but would it, you know, 7 to 10 years or whenever down the line, but would there be an ask for funding for feasibility study soon? Is that what this says?
Yes. So, right, the park committee ends on, help me out here, right, in like a month and a half, right? And so when before the park committee ends, we will be making recommendations to the select board, and one of those recommendations will be you know, for a consultant study of the to look at structured parking. I guess my assumption is that the select board either, you know, agrees with that or doesn't agree with that, and then moves that recommendation forward to as part of their budget, if that's what they choose to do. So I don't mean to be cagey, Angela, but right, I mean, like, we make the recommendation. The normal course of things, I think, is that then the select board takes that recommendation, and if they would agree with it, right, they bring that through. And certainly, right, there would be a discussion about the merits of spending that money at town meeting.
Okay. So I understand that. I think that I have to agree that I understand that you're looking long-term. You're talking 7 to 10 years. You want a feasibility study. As a town meeting member, I would say that a parking garage is so far down on my list of what would need to be put forward with as far as capital planning. And I don't know what a parking garage would cost now or would cost 5 to 10 years from now, but are we talking tens of millions of dollars? I have no idea.
We're probably talking for something on the CVS lot, probably about 5 million.
5 million. Okay.
Yeah.
And still, you know, when you think of other capital plan or, you know, capital items that we're looking for. So I think it's something to keep down the line, but honestly, even as far as putting forth money for feasibility study, I would not be in favor of that. So
Absolutely, with your putting your town meeting member hat on, right, those are the sorts of decisions that you, assuming that you are a town meeting member,
or hopefully I will be then too.
Right.
Yeah.
Those are the sorts of decisions that town meeting will have to make. You know, it's right. This is something that, from the parking perspective, we think that, you know, it would be warranted. But, you know, there's a lot of other things in town that are warranted, and, you know, it's balancing that stuff. So,
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So,
thank you.
yeah,
Thanks.
no disagreement, right? But it's sort of our charge to put out, you know, what we think would advance this discussion. So.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. And the next hand I saw raised is John Sasso. Sorry if I pronounced that.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yep. So John Sasso, 66 Richards Road in Reading, and I got an email regarding the meeting as a result of being a prior town meeting member, hopefully also to continue. Full disclosure, I'm also a member currently of the recalc committee, and that'll be interesting in a minute. But first, I just want to thank John for bringing up the issue about a parking structure in Groundhog Day, because when he said that, I went back and I said, I actually saw visions of that back in 2007, and I actually pulled out my old 2007 parking report, and there is an Appendix E, which for some reason I don't have, that did actually put some structured parking ideas onto paper. So if you don't have that report, let me know. there is a whole section on structured parking. Again, it's obviously very dated in terms of its data, but there was some information there about it. I just as a personal opinion, I'm certainly not an advocate for the structured parking myself, but just to give you guys an update, there was some work done, maybe more than what you had thought, if you weren't aware of that.
John, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
Was that a Nelson Nygaard study, or was that something that was done prior to that?
You know, I can't answer that question. I can only tell you that the report was issued, Downtown Talking Passport issued June of 2007, and it was chaired, the committee was chaired by Gil Rodriguez. George, I just remember George was on the George Katsoufis.
George Katsoufis.
Yeah,
all right.
was on the team, and I think he actually put some of the drawings together. So
Okay,
anyhow,
great. If we can't find it, I'll tap into George and see if he
Yeah.
can pull something out. So
I literally found it on my hard drive as we were talking. I'm like, whoa.
No, thank you, because we that was not something, at least that I was aware of. I don't know if that got buried in the town hall archives. So.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think a lot of stuff after Chris left got tossed. So
yeah, there's a big transition there. Yeah.
So second question, just I don't remember if this actually made it anywhere, but there was, as part of that, a presentation to change one of the bylaws or zoning rules about payments in lieu of meeting parking requirements. Now, I know some of that got taken over by the fact that we went to 40R, but I was just curious, were there ever any payments made in lieu of parking requirements in the downtown? Does anybody know that?
I will say not that I know of, and not since I've been on the CPDC, which I think was shortly after you were not, or maybe we even overlapped a little bit, John. However, right, there has been some discussion about just sort of payment in lieu of different planning improvements associated with site plan review on 40R projects. So that concept is sort of making its way back into the Reading context. But as far as I know, and I don't know if Julie or Andrew know of any payment in lieu of parking.
Yeah, I don't know. To be honest with you, I don't know where that ended up, but it was specifically targeted for parking. The last comment I just want to make, and it's related to recalc. For those that don't know, there's also a committee moving forward with looking at a senior center or multicultural center or generational center in Reading. And the reason I bring it up is that one of the things we've been talking about, both long-term and short-term needs, is transportation. And I was just curious if the parking committee considered, any impacts of what transportation in Reading could look like and how it could impact the access to the downtown without expanding the need for parking, potentially having pick up and drop off spaces in certain places. Certainly the COA, the Committee Council on Aging, obviously has been talking about this for a while. We've talked about transportation in Reading generically over the years. And I'm just curious if that was something that you folks incorporated into your discussions, because I certainly think it's something that, we're going to have to address. And I think it could have a positive impact in some respects to what you're trying to accomplish.
Since I had the floor last, I'll cover that a little bit. It came up in our discussions because it's hard to talk about parking without also talking about circulation and access to downtown and all those sorts of things. We actually tried to steer clear of getting too deep into those discussions. We have enough on our hands trying to just focus on the parking, but I think a lot of the members recognize that that certainly affects the future demand if there's less people that are getting to downtown by way of the single occupant vehicle. You know, and so, you know, it's hard to talk about sort of the long-term future of parking in downtown use without talking about transportation. But as a committee, we tried not to delve too deeply into that. I don't know if anyone else has any other perspective.
This is when I wish Jay was here. Jay had a
Yeah.
lot to say about transportation. So it definitely came up and he has a lot of great ideas and we would love him to start another committee.
Yeah, we have one committee member that is really focused on some of those issues.
Okay,
He's
thank
not
you.
here tonight.
Yep, thanks.
If I could just follow up too, John.
Sure.
Thanks. Yeah, other John as well. I just go back to when the Met, Postmark, Ace Flats, et cetera, was being constructed and whatnot with the parking ratio, the whole 1.25, and then it's only going to be single people living in there that are going to take the train, and there's not going to be any parking issues. And then at the beginning of this call, it's clear that the 1.25 thing is way out of whack. And there's a massive parking issue that has just come up only from Postmark itself. So by adding on future development here and everything, it's only going to get worse. And I mean, I can't see it getting better because currently it is the way it is. We didn't have single people taking the train. It's other people that came in with families, additional cars, et cetera. We can't control who moves here. And my thinking is I moved to Reading once again for the schools, et cetera. That comes with kids. I mean, you can't just rely on what it was stated it was going to be 3 years ago and then apply it to what it actually ends up happening now. So I think the demand is definitely there, and I could just see it increasing over time and only getting worse, especially if everyone thinks that the downtown parking issue is solved. Then there's going to be more of an influx of people that, you know, had the mindset of that I can't go to downtown anyway to park. Why am I going to go there? But now it's all fixed. So now it's just going to create more of a demand. But that's why it's more of institute this. We will see what happens. And then, you know, we'll go from there and just adjust. And perhaps everything is just corrected the way that it's supposed to be. So that's all.
Thank you, everyone. And the next hand I see is Brendan Connor.
Thanks. So yeah, I think I echo somewhat what some of the other people have said, that the transportation aspect really ties in here. So going back to, you know, one of the recommendations is to further study a structured parking. You know, I worry if that amount of money that would be spent even just on the first steps of getting a consultant and, you know, having them do a report on just structured parking, would that money not be better spent maybe if the park committee recommends, like, you know, that these, you know, issues are very tied in with transportation? We should really look more into like taking what we found in 2018 or whenever it was that last study of parking was done by NYGARD. Would it make more sense to like really look more in depth at what that transportation network needs to look like in the future, you know, as we hopefully move away from single occupancy vehicles to more electric cars, needing electric charging stations, needing pickup drop-off spots for Uber and Lyft, needing better public transportation, better bike networks, things like that, as electric bikes especially become more popular, and really opens biking up away from just like, you know, the 20-somethings who can ride around to like really all ages being able to cycle. So, you know, I think that if I was to make a recommendation going forward, I would hope it would be a little more inclusive of all those issues. And that could definitely include the structured parking. But, you know, if that's one of the recommendations coming out, is there, you know, further study area? Would it be within the purview of the park committee to, you know, say to the select board, we should really hire somebody who would look at all these issues and make it a big picture? Because like you said, it's not, you know, it's like you can look at one part of the body, but that doesn't tell you the whole picture. You really have to look at the whole thing.
Yeah, I don't disagree about the need to look at the whole thing, which is to some degree what those Nelson Nygaard studies did, right? They started looking at that. from the park committee's perspective, the benefit of looking at structured parking is that it's a fairly narrow study, and it will answer some long-standing questions that whenever I mean, you can go back to studies done in the 60s and 70s, and they talked about parking garages, and maybe some of that material that John Sasso mentioned will answer some of those questions. But really, we saw it as a pretty small, it's a pretty contained study, and so not a big commitment in terms of town expenditure, but would answer some questions that have been out there for a long time, and provide some data on, whether that's something that should be continued to be discussed, or whether, Brendan, we go full into, put everything into some of those demand, mitigating the demand, and there won't be, people, the town will have knowledge on what the other options are. If there are folks that really are still focused on creating more parking instead of the demand side, managing demand.
Yeah.
Supply. All right. Providing more
Yeah,
supply.
supply.
Is what I should
Yeah,
say.
exactly. Yeah, because I think that is the balance.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
If I could just add another perspective on this too. So yeah, Brandon, I think we definitely talked a lot about this, and speaking as someone who does ride his bike to downtown Reading and I do ride my bike into downtown Boston, as does my son, although he got hit by a car riding his bike in Greenwood and destroyed his bike, so he's not riding right now. But I'm certainly sympathetic to this, but I also kind of have a balanced view of it, that if you look at our study, moms with 2 kids going to the orthodontist office are not going to ride their bike or their electric bike with a couple of kids. I mean, we have to acknowledge the fact that we live in a suburban town. We do not have effective public transportation circulating around town. I take the bus into Malden sometimes if I missed a train. It's not functional, right, for somebody who needs to sort of get around town. I don't see many other people joining me riding their bikes, so I just think that we need to be realistic that this is a suburban town. It's not Chelsea. It's not, Somerville and Cambridge, where they do have public transportation options. So we have to acknowledge that and deal with it and just manage the situation as it is. So that's the only other. I think those are a couple of perspectives.
I appreciate that perspective. Yeah, and I've been a cyclist for, not a cyclist even. I've been like a guy who rides his bike because I don't like driving, honestly. But I do think it's something that's also partially due to that environment, right? So part of the park committee, like looking at street space and everything else, even though this is a suburban community, it's also a community that was developed, prior to the car. A lot of it was developed post 1950s, but a lot of it was existing prior to that, when it was sort of like, a train station, the end of a, suburban tram line, that sort of thing. So we actually have the bones that could support a much more, walkable, friendly city that could be used as a cycling sort of like city in some ways, or our town, sorry. And, I just would caution to say that, we're this way, we're never going to change, because a lot of it is the built environment that's going to kind of encourage people to, take that trip. Like maybe it's, yeah, you pick a pin, you've got 3 kids going to hockey practice, and like, that's not the trip you're going to make, right? But if it's a trip to, the grocery store, and you just have to pick up a couple things, and you change that one trip, that's a big deal, and it might be something where you do have the car for those other trips, but there are the options, and maybe someday the MBTA will get its act together and we'll get better public transport up here. But I would caution against totally writing off the alternative transportation methods when those are probably going to be a big part of fixing these problems down the road. So
but I think what you're specifically talking about is basically cycling downtown, right? Because we don't have control over adding bus routes or
No,
public
yeah,
transport routes,
yeah.
right? So we're
Yeah,
only
no, so
talking
yeah,
about,
buses are definitely another
right.
story. Buses,
So
public
it's really
transport's a
just
whole
a
nother story,
function.
but definitely, yeah,
How many
cycling is
people,
definitely
how
something
many
I think
people?
that, sorry, yeah,
And
cycling.
we've added, I know that the town has already added more bicycle parking stations down by the commuter rail. So that's
Mhm.
already done. So I think that's a step in the right direction. And
Yeah,
look, I mean, I encourage my fellow residents to join me in cycling all around, all the way into
yeah, it's
Boston.
actually,
if
it's
you
a
want.
great, it's
So if you,
a nice,
if you want, I'm happy to ride in with people. But,
yeah.
I consider myself a minority, and I don't,
Oh, for sure.
I don't think that other people are, I mean, look, I'm just trying to be realistic, that's all.
No, yeah, yeah. I always caution it's, the realistic, like what we have, like if we look, how can we start to shift people away? Because even the, places you think, oh, everybody rides their bike there, like Portland, Oregon, it's like 10% of people. You don't need a lot of people on bikes to really change
makes a difference.
Perception, things like that. So, it is an option. It's an option that I think could be part of the solution going forward, but definitely not the whole solution, but part of it.
Definitely.
Thank you, Brendan.
Thank
Very good food for thought going forward. I just want to jump to what looks like our last hand raised, which is Mary Ann Downing.
Hi, I just wanted to answer John Sasso's question about Appendix E and the old parking study, because, I love to hunt around the archives, and before the town website goes away, you can find the 2007 parking study in the June 26, 2007 packet, starting at page 29. Appendix E starts at page 69 and has structured parking layouts for the CVS lot, the Atlantic lot, which no longer exists because that's 30 Haven, and Town Hall. So that stuff is still there. Get it before it goes away. I will note that the CVS structured parking layout, I mean, a Town Hall person who's on a computer could pull that up. If you go to the main website and hit archives and then go to select board minutes, June 26, 2007, there's the packet. Even in 2007 dollars, the facility cost of a 3-level parking facility in the CVS lot was $4.2 million to give 180 spaces. And for a 4-level facility, I'm just reading, $5.2 million. So they were calling it roughly, 21 grand a spot. So that's $2,008. And I would venture to say we would probably have to double or triple that, but someone like Bernie might be more of an expert, or someone else. But anyway, I just wanted to pass along that that study still exists, and you can find it on the Town Hall website.
Thank you, Mary Ann. That's great. I will definitely
Yeah.
pull that out and share that with the committee.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, certainly those the costs per space are 2.5 times, maybe 3 times at this point. And what we had, just from a simple standpoint, just looked at a single deck, but instead of a 3-level. But yeah, that's great. Thank you. We'll take a look at that and see how if that answers some questions.
Yeah, I mean, it's an old study, and it's like a downtown that was before it was renovated, but maybe no one was even talking about a Town Hall lot, so maybe there's even some value there with a garage, because that's
the lots, right?
The
lots haven't changed. A lot of the utilities are the same, and so there's probably some good information about feasibility issues in that. So
anything we can save money on.
Yes, agreed.
Okay, thank you.
Mike Coltman, I saw your hand go up and down. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I lowered my hand, but and I got in late, so I apologize. But I am concerned about overnight parking for all the residents downtown. What do they do during snow emergencies and all that sort of thing?
Chris, you want to take this one more time?
Yes, thanks, Liz. And thanks for joining, Michael. Yes, the select board voted last night on the
triple TF recommendation to make across from the commuter rail over where Swiss Bakers, amazing chocolate chip croissants. Over in there, 35 spots for overnight parking. You will have to leave by 6 a.m. though, or risk being towed. So that goes to public discussion on February 15th. And if there's no disagreement with it, it'll go into effect as a pilot program on the next day, I believe. So it is being addressed, and it is being addressed this year, obviously. So because there's definitely an issue with it. So
Thanks very much. I thought I heard that, but I wasn't sure because I came in late.
No worries at all.
Thank you, guys. And with no hands left, I'll just jump to what's next for Park. So Park is going to oh, sorry, Angela, I saw your hand come up. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to comment on something that Marianne brought up, and this is a little off topic, but it's for CPDC members who are on it. When we're talking about developers and we're listening to developers talking about not being able to afford or adequate parking for their tenants, we really need to be thinking about what is it costing taxpayers and what is it costing the citizens when we're talking about, you know, a garage that would cost $21,000 or however much per parking spot. So when we're talking about revising the 40R and parking, that's something that this whole discussion, I think, should be informing the revisions of the 40R. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. So again, just what's next for Park, and what you can see here is Park is going to reconvene a week from today, Wednesday on February 9th at 7 p.m. They'll debrief from the public forum that was held tonight, which we received a lot of great public comment and a lot of great notes that I've written down. So we'll hold that discussion then. And also what will happen is that the town's parking traffic transportation task force, is that triple T's, will also attend the Park meeting. Some members are also here tonight, so big thanks to them for coming and listening in. Park will discuss their recommendations with the PTTF and look to finalize some of these recommendations, which they will then take to a future select board meeting to again discuss with the entire select board. So that date is hopeful for March, but it's not final yet. So we're still looking into that and what date will make sense. So a big thank you to everybody coming tonight. A big thank you to Park. Big thank you to town staff. I think this was quite successful and a really great discussion. So again, Julie and I are always happy to talk offline with anybody and everybody who has more comments or questions, and anybody is always welcome to attend whatever Park meetings are left.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Turnout.
Thanks, everyone.
Good
See
night.
you on February 9th.
Thank
Thank
you so
you.
much.
Cheers.
Thanks all. Have a good night.
Have a good one.
Good night.